A Tudor estate stands in the hills of East Sussex, its stone walls weathered since 1591. Jeff Beck called Riverhall home for nearly half a century, a Grade II listed country house in Wadhurst that looked like it had been plucked out of a Shakespeare play. Inside, oak beams and centuries-old masonry contrasted with the hum of amplifiers and the scent of machine oil drifting from a garage out back. This was not just a musician's retreat, but a workshop where music and mechanics collided. It is a long way from 206 Demesne Road in Wallington, Surrey, the suburban address where Beck was born in June 1944. As a child, he improvised instruments from cigar boxes and fence posts, stringing them with model aircraft wire to imitate the sound of the guitars he heard on the radio. That boyhood act of invention, no chrome, no money, just stubborn creativity, would foreshadow a lifetime of building things by hand. Whether it was a solo that bent the rules of music or a hot rod that roared down a country lane, Riverhall was the win, the great fortress he earned. But it also became the wound, a place he rarely left, a cocoon that isolated him in his later years. The estate was privacy and pride, yet it anchored him to one corner of England while the rest of the world was chasing stadium tours and celebrity spotlights. There was, however, one more property in his story. In Los Feliz, Los Angeles, he bought a craftsman-style home in 2014 for just over $1 million. It wasn't vast in square footage, 2,364 feet with 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, but it was tailored to music. A soundproof studio sat where the garage once was, its walls lined for acoustics, a small theater tucked beside it. By 2022, he was asking $2.95 million for it, almost triple his purchase price. In Los Angeles, where musicians often flaunt marble foyers and infinity pools, Beck's house felt modest, an investment more than a statement. It underscored his paradox, a man worth millions who preferred machines in a workshop to chandeliers in a hallway. But for Beck, the truest rooms were never in the house. They were in the garage. By the mid-2000s, his personal collection numbered around 14 hot rods and 3 Corvettes. These weren't polished trophies he had bought from dealers. Many were stripped down and rebuilt in his own workshop, sandblasters and welding tools beside guitar amps. One of his earliest loves was a 1932 3-window coupe. He spotted it in a tiny classified ad, bought it, and shipped it to California for a complete restoration. It came back gleaming, proof that patience and grease-stained knuckles could turn a forgotten shell into a rolling sculpture. Another car in his garage carried cinematic irony. When the original Ford Deuce coupe from American Graffiti went up for auction, Beck tried to buy it. He lost, so he built his own, painted it, detailed it, and gave it a license plate that read THX138, a nod to George Lucas's first film. The replica wasn't about settling for second best. It was about proving that creation could rival ownership. When Eric Clapton once compared their garages, Beck dismissed Ferraris with a grin. Anyone can buy those. These you make. It was less about rivalry than philosophy, wealth measured not in brands but in craft. This was his wealth, not Italian sports cars that screamed of status, but American hot rods that whispered of hours in the garage, welding, sanding, spraying. And yet that same garage nearly cost him everything. In 1987, working under the hood, he nearly severed his thumb. Years later, he laughed about sandblasting away his skin. To anyone else, they were mishaps. To him, they were near brushes with losing the very hands that built his sound. The contrast to his boyhood could not be sharper. As a child, he didn't even have access to a car. His mother handed him a copy of Hot Rod magazine when he was 6, and that glossy paper became his window into a world of engines and chrome. What was once a distant dream on a page became the reality of his estate. 14 hot rods, 3 Corvettes, 1 garage that pulsed like a second stage. But cars alone didn't define him. The other stage, the literal one, was where his craft found immortality. In 2009, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted him as a solo artist. Jimmy Page, his childhood acquaintance and fellow Yardbird, called him the Quiet Chief. Then Page picked up a guitar and the two men played Beck's Bolero together. That instrumental had first been recorded in 1966 with Page on rhythm, Keith Moon on drums, John Paul Jones on bass, and Nicky Hopkins on piano. It was a supergroup before Led Zeppelin had a name, a track that fused classical phrasing with rock aggression. On the induction stage, decades later, its opening riff rolled out like thunder, each note bending in Beck's hands into something unrepeatable. For the audience, it was awe, an echo of history reborn in real time. For Beck, it was full circle. From the boy who heard Les Paul's "How High the Moon" on a crackling radio, to a man whose sound now defined how the electric guitar could speak. But reverence was never the whole picture. Beck resisted being defined by the industry's expectations. When the Rolling Stones asked him to replace Mick Taylor, he turned them down, telling friends he was half dead at the time and that joining would destroy his reputation. Joining the Stones could have meant stadium tours and global fame, but Beck chose to stay independent. Even his hits were sources of discomfort. His 1967 pop single, "Hi-Ho Silver Lining," was a chart success. But Beck despised it. He carried the shadow of one pop hit for decades, calling it a pink toilet seat hung around your neck. For him, the music worth remembering was instrumental, experimental, and risky. Pop singles, however lucrative, felt like chains. That stubbornness was both principle and price. It kept him respected among peers, yet it left him absent from the highest peaks of commercial fame. It made him a cult hero, but one often misunderstood by casual listeners. The story of Jeff Beck's fortune is not just written in pounds and dollars, it is written in scars, refusals, and the weight of decisions that cost him as much as they protected him. One of those scars came in December 1969 when he survived a car accident that fractured his skull. He was already famous by then, having replaced Eric Clapton in the Yardbirds 4 years earlier. But the crash sidelined him, leaving his contemporaries racing ahead in the same years when Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple were building global empires. The wound was physical, but its cost was also measured in opportunities lost. It contrasted sharply with his earliest years when his entire career could have ended before it began. As a teenager, he spent time working odd jobs, car paint sprayer, decorator, even golf course groundsman. That kind of labor left no room for skull fractures. It was survival work, and it was steady. By choosing the riskier path of music and speed, he gambled his body as much as his fortune. And yet his artistry kept pulling him forward. Even after the accident, he reinvented himself with the Jeff Beck Group. By 1968, their album Truth reached number 15 on the Billboard charts. The lineup included Rod Stewart, Ronnie Wood, and Nicky Hopkins, men who would later become household names. The sessions were chaotic, Stewart once rejecting a week's worth of Beck's demos for being in the wrong key. But the chaos produced sound that burned itself into rock history. For all his disdain for mainstream hits, Beck was still no stranger to trophies. He won 8 Grammy Awards across his career, including 3 for the 2010 album Emotion and Commotion. That record had him reinterpreting Nessun Dorma on guitar, bending Puccini's aria into electric wails. It was the very definition of awe, centuries of operatic tradition funneled through a Stratocaster. The track ended with the same line sung by Luciano Pavarotti, but Beck's hands had already spoken it differently. That awe, however, came with wounds too. The Grammys crowned him a master, but in interviews he dismissed the idea of perfection. "If I don't break the rules at least 10 times in every song, then I'm not doing my job properly," he once said. It was a philosophy that thrilled purists and frustrated producers. To the world, he was a genius. To the industry, he was unpredictable. The unpredictability carried into his wealth. By his death, his net worth was estimated at around $20 million. Yet in 2001, he was bitter about what he called the 46% tax rate. His complaint was not abstract, and he had just finished repainting several of his cars because the damp English climate made the paint blister. Every pound he earned seemed to end up either in the hands of the taxman or the body shop. Wealth looked different when it was trapped in steel, lacquer, and stone. It was also fragile. In 1987, nearly losing his thumb in his garage could have destroyed his ability to play. To a man whose touch was his fortune, the near miss was as terrifying as any tax bill. But Beck's wounds were not only physical or financial, they were also reputational. his refusals carried weight. To Beck, saying no to offers, even from giants, was as defining as the music he said yes to. It left him with smaller tours, fewer headlines, and less money than he might have had. Yet it also cemented his reputation as the guitarist's guitarist, respected, uncompromising, and unwilling to become a cog in someone else's machine. He carried the shadow of one pop hit for decades, calling it a pink toilet seat hung around your neck. For Beck, humiliation sometimes sold more records than pride. Even his relationships carried both triumph and sting. He married Patricia Brown in 1963, long before his fame, but the marriage ended by 1967. He then spent nearly 2 decades with Celia Hammond, the model whose photograph graced the cover of Truth. In 2005, he married Sandra Cash, who remained with him until his death. He left his entire fortune to her, signing a will in 2017 that made her sole heir. The contrast is striking: a man who built hot rods and played guitars that roared like thunder, yet who ended his days quietly tethered to one partner in a Sussex manor. And though he had no children, the auction of his guitars in 2025 became his strange inheritance to the world. That auction was itself a spectacle. In January 2025, Christie's London sold 130 of his guitars, amps, and tools. The sale brought in £8,727,284 in total. His white Strat Anushka went for £1,008,000. His 1954 Gibson Les Paul Oxblood crossed the £1 million mark. Even the Yardburst Les Paul hit £403,200. For fans, each instrument was a relic. For his estate, each was a ledger entry, turning strings and wood into banknotes. But the most telling detail was that the final 4 lots, all sold for significant sums, went entirely to the Folly Wildlife Rescue Trust. It was the same charity he had quietly supported while alive. The man who built roaring hot rods also funded the rescue of owls, hedgehogs, and songbirds. It was a contrast as sharp as his guitar bends: thunder one moment, silence the next. Even his friendships carried contradictions. Johnny Depp was a frequent visitor to his Sussex home in later years, a friendship that drew public attention during Depp's own highly publicized trials. Some saw it as Beck offering sanctuary, others saw it as risky optics. Either way, it showed Beck's indifference to perception. His estate, built in 1591, was as much refuge for actors as it was for birds. And yet the house itself, Riverhall, was perhaps the most telling possession of all. Grade 2 listed with heavy stone and centuries of history, it contrasted violently with the modest suburban semi in Wallington, where Beck was born. From cigar box guitars to £1 million Strats, from odd jobs painting cars to a garage of Corvettes, from Demesne Road to Riverhall, the trajectory was not just upward, it was jagged, full of wounds and reinventions. The final wound came in January 2023, when Beck died suddenly of bacterial meningitis. It was a quiet end for a man whose life had been anything but. Reports described his funeral as a private affair, with only close family and Johnny Depp said to be present. Jimmy Page eulogized him as the quiet chief, a phrase that captured both his humility and his command. And yet the legacy outlives the silence. Beck was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, once with the Yardbirds, once as a solo artist. He bent Puccini into guitar whales, turned garages into museums, and refused the lure of stadium-sized fame when it clashed with his principles. He left behind guitars worth millions, cars worth less but crafted with more love, and an estate that was both fortress and cage. The win was always there: awe, mastery, innovation. But the wound was never far behind: accidents, disdain for his own hits, and the cost of living outside the mainstream. Jeff Beck's lifestyle was never built to impress the crowd. It was built to satisfy his own obsessions. A 1932 Ford Coupe, a white Stratocaster, a Tudor estate with a garage that roared louder than any ballroom. It was eccentric, sometimes costly, sometimes isolating. But in its contradictions, it revealed something rare. A life shaped not by what he could buy, but by what he could build. That is the secret wealth of Jeff Beck. A lifestyle of hot rods and 16th century stone, of £1 million guitars and woodland charities, of refusing Ferraris, rejecting the Stones, and bending rules until they screamed. He left behind an empire of sound and steel, and a reminder that the greatest fortunes are not always measured in what you own. Sometimes they're measured in what you make.